Hello, friends. Welcome back to the While We're Waiting Hope After Child Loss podcast. I'm Jill Sullivan, your host and one of the co-founders of the While We're Waiting ministry. This is a podcast of stories of devastating loss and grief and heartbreak and struggle, and stories of hope and healing and faith and, yes, even joy. Underlying every conversation is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, which makes it possible to not just survive the loss of a child, but to live well while we're waiting to see them again in heaven one day. You can learn more about our ministry and the free bereaved parent retreats we host by visiting our website at www.whilewe'rewaiting.org. Welcome to episode number 269. We're beginning a two-part series today with my friend Kelly Uribe, who invites us into the very difficult and challenging journey she walked with her son Ernesto. As a boy and young teen, Ernesto was full of fun, full of life, and what Kelly referred to as a people gatherer. But in time, he began struggling with depression, which set their family on an arduous path through the mental health care system. They pursued every level of support available: therapists, medications, intensive outpatient care, residential treatment, even wilderness therapy. Yet the road was long, exhausting, and often overwhelming. In September of 2022, after years of struggle, Ernesto died by suicide at the age of 18. Kelly speaks with honesty about the heartbreak of losing her son and the weight of walking through such complex layers of mental illness. Yet what shines through her story is her deep faith in God, the anchor that has carried her through the darkest nights, reminded her that Ernesto is safely with Jesus, and given her the courage to share her family's journey with others. Our conversation is raw yet tender and filled with hope. I believe Kelly's testimony will speak deeply to your heart. Hi, Kelly. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much, Jill, for having me on the podcast today. I am really grateful for this opportunity to share Ernesto's story, which is also my story, and maybe more importantly, God's story.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, I've been looking forward to visiting with you when I've heard your story twice now at retreats, and it's been a blessing to me, and I think it'll be a blessing to our listeners as well. So let's get started by giving you an opportunity to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you're from and what life is like for you there.
Okay, well, I live in Gainesville, Virginia, which is about 35 miles west of Washington, D.C. Our 16-year-old son, Daniel, says that we live on the edge of civilization. And in a way, it's true, because if you just drive west from our house, you are in beautiful horse country, farms, rolling hills, the Shenandoah Valley. But if you drive east, it is suburbia, more suburbia, urban, and then into DC. So we do live on the edge of civilization. But I live here in Gainesville with my husband, Ernest. We have been married for almost 23 years this year. We have been living all of that time, our married life, here in Northern Virginia, which is a bit of a change because I grew up moving very often. My father was in the Army, and then I was in the Army myself. So I moved 15 times by the time I was 30, but haven't moved in the last 23. And my husband, Ernst, grew up overseas. His father was in the Foreign Service. So he spent most of his childhood in Latin America. We have two sons. Ernesto, who would be 20 this year in August, and Daniel, who is 16. I love reading. Ernst does woodworking, horseback riding. Daniel loves to cook. He's in all kinds of academic stuff. He's a year-round swimmer. So overall, I would say we have a very busy and full life here in Northern Virginia. And I do work part-time at the Pentagon, and Ernst works for the State Department. So it's been an interesting time here to be a federal civil servant in DC too. So
Oh, sure.
yeah.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah, and we're members of St. Paul's Episcopal Church, where I teach children's church, and we have a myriad of pets. So cats, birds, a snapping turtle, frog, and our dog of 12 years recently passed away. But that's a little bit
Wow.
about us.
Yeah, that's quite a menagerie there.
It is.
Yeah, I guess you can do that when you live on the edge of civilization.
Yes, and luckily the cats are quieter than our dog was, so we should not
Yes,
be
yeah.
interrupted.
Okay, good deal. Good deal. All right. Well, we're here to talk about Ernesto today, and I would love for you to help our listeners get to know him a little bit.
Okay, well, Ernesto is just wonderful, and I love to share him and talk about him. I think if I had one word to describe that child, it would be fun. I mean, he just loved fun, living, playing pranks, being with people. He was really a charismatic people gatherer from the time he was young. He always wanted to be playing with others. If other kids weren't around, he wanted to play with me, and we always were playing something big. Fireman, a police officer, soldier, but always together. And people really loved him back too. It was amazing. We had, even when he was 10 or 12 years old, there was a little kindergartner across the street who would come to our door and say, "Can Ernesto play?" And he would kindly go out and play ball with her. And he was really funny, always doing something adventurous. I guess that was the other thing about that child. He was an adventurous soul. From the time he was tiny, when he was 3 years old, he launched himself from the top of our stairs in a laundry basket. And when I found him at the bottom, he said, "Mama, my rocket crashed." He just, yeah, he just was always trying something bigger, faster, better. He and a group of boys as teenagers swam across our lake. I think his sense of adventure is what led him to graffiti, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah.
But he just
Sure.
loved this excitement of finding these really high, dangerous places to put his tag and his mark. In fact, almost a year after he died, I saw a tag that I did not know was still there, and it was at the top of this building. And I thought to myself, how did he get there? But he did.
Wow.
And I guess the other thing I would say about Ernesto is he was so observant, and I think he really had a keen artistic eye. He just could see things, I think, sometimes that other people couldn't. A very simple one. Once when he was in fourth grade, he walked into the house, literally turned his head and said, "Oh, I see you moved the things on the mantle." And I thought, oh my goodness, yes, I did, but like 6 inches. How did you notice this?
Right.
But somehow he had this ability to see. I think he saw others. He saw the world around him. He took beautiful photographs that just kind of captured light and fog and all of these other things. And I guess, kind of in conclusion, Ernesto was just a big presence. Like, you knew when Ernesto was in the house. It was kind of loud, it was exciting, he was moving around, he was giving you these giant bear hugs that were amazing. His music was blaring, which was hip hop for sure. But you just knew he was there, and he was, yeah, a joy. He was just a joy in every way.
Yeah, I can see how he must have been such a joy to your family. I love how you describe him as a people gatherer and a big presence. Those are good things.
Yeah. Interestingly, during some of his treatment, he took a personality test, and the quadrants that they put people into, we learned in our family, each one of us was in a different quadrant.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, so he really filled this space in our family that was very different, very unique, and yeah, so important.
Yes, absolutely. So at some point, things began to change with Ernesto. How about you pick up the story from there?
Yes. At some point during the course of Ernesto's treatment, he was asked to write an autobiography. He started that autobiography very simply, but he said, the first 12 and a half years of my life were happy and simple. And all those fun things I just described about his childhood, that was it. It was happy and simple. And I believe that that was true. It was a very idyllic childhood in many ways. But then when Ernesto was 12 and a half, it was spring of sixth grade. He was a year round swimmer, an honor roll student, very active in Cub Scout, Boy Scouts at that point, church, he acolyte, all kinds of things. He had a wonderful group of friends. But that spring, he told another scout, I want to stab myself in the neck. And
Mm.
the scout did the absolute right thing. He told the scoutmaster. The scoutmaster called us. Ernst and I literally, well, freaked out might be too simple, but we immediately found a licensed professional counselor. We literally scooped Ernesto up from school one day, took him to this therapist. She evaluated him and she said, I don't think he's a threat to himself or others, but he might benefit from continued therapy. And that was it. There was just this, it felt like such an aberration, but
Hmm.
we did continue with therapy for a few weeks, but then everything else on the outside remained just the same. So he was talking to friends, getting good grades, and I think Ernst and I made the calculation, I don't think he really needs this. We asked him explicitly about suicide. At that point, are you still having these thoughts? He said no. And so Ernst and I thought, well, we don't want him to think that he has a problem. Like in hindsight, this is a crazy thing to think, but we just decided, all right, we'll stop. We don't need to continue this therapy. Let's, go on. And
Sure.
things went on just fine for another
Hmm.
year. We had maybe actually 2 more years. We had a few indications of things that kind of weren't quite right, but nothing, he got in trouble in school in seventh grade. We tried to make sure we had some good mentors for him, but by and large, nothing had changed on the outside.
Sure.
And later, we had a therapist tell us that really what Ernesto was probably experiencing, he was like a high functioning depression. So he was
Mm.
feeling the depression, but on the outside, things were fine. Then in eighth grade, which was the 2019-2020 year, we moved that summer across the county to a neighborhood that was much closer to all of his really good swim friends, particularly. And so, in a lot of ways, I thought the move would be good. Maybe we just need a change of scenery, we will be closer. But in eighth grade, things just started to really fall apart. In the new school that fall, his grades started out fine and then they really fell off. He started hanging out with a new group of friends at the new school that I would put in the quote unquote red category. More drugs and alcohol, skipping class. This is the kind of
Mm.
crowd.
Sure.
He was caught vaping at swim practice, which that was not good. But I think the most significant change that year, he just started to say, I don't care. And that
Mm.
was not like Ernesto. Ernesto
Hmm.
always cared. And he was, you know, that was the biggest change. And he said it a lot. And finally, we hit January of 2020. And one evening, perhaps in a little bit of exasperation on my part, I just went into his room that night and said, Ernesto, you know that your father and I, we do not love you because you're handsome, because you're funny, because you're athletic, because you're smart. You are all of those things. You're friendly. That's not why we love you. We just love you because you are our child. And right now, things don't seem right, and we are here and we want to help in whatever way we can. We will take you to the doctor. We will do whatever we need to do. And Ernesto said in his typical kind of brusque but dramatic style, he just said, get out. And so I walked out of the room and prayed a lot,
Sure.
and not even knowing quite what to pray for because he was also our first teenager. So there was part of me that wondered, is this what teenagers are like? I was not like this, but maybe this is it.
Right.
And the next morning he said, take me to the doctor. So we went to see our pediatrician who had known him since he was 2 weeks old, and he was diagnosed that day with major depressive disorder. And so that started us on the mental health, mental illness journey. And of course, this is 2020. So we are just rolling into COVID. We have this diagnosis. And I think the only way I can describe that year, in a lot of ways, I thought COVID was a blessing for us because it stopped school. It took us, we had a wonderful family RV trip across the country to get to the ranch in Texas. And so, so all those things were good, but 2020 was kind of a steady decline for Ernesto. And at the same time, it was this steady incline, this ramp up of mental health supports. So he was diagnosed. We started on an antidepressant. We started weekly therapy. The first medication didn't work. We went to another medication. We added a psychiatrist. He proposed a third medication, then an antipsychotic, and we're like, we're not ready for all of this. There were side effects. Then we found another psychiatrist, an integrative psychiatrist, who was very helpful, did lots of testing, but just difficult protocols to follow to kind of make sure he was healthy kind of from the bottom up. And then we went to 2 times a week therapy. Then we went to an intensive outpatient program. This is all just getting to August. So that was January to August. This just ramping up. And then at the same time, Ernesto was just devolving. He was sneaking out of the house. He was pushing every boundary. I think he just didn't know what to do with what he was feeling. We found a noose in his game room that year. We found notes and writings about death and suicidal ideation, which is so scary. I mean, scary for me as his mom, but gosh, scary for him too. Yeah. And just super hard year. And so we finally got to the point after the intensive outpatient program. His therapist was seeing him twice a week. She said he needs more care than I can provide, and to her credit, she pretty much refused to see him because he needed more care. And the next level of care for us to go to was residential. And that was just so hard to even imagine such a thing. And how do you choose where to go? And so finally, his psychiatrist said he had completely reversed his days and nights. So Ernst and I were exhausted too because he was up all night, he was sleeping all day, he wasn't going to school. And so the psychiatrist said if he can't access school, he needs to go to residential. So
Sure.
we found an amazing program. This is again in the middle of COVID, so that it was, but the program was in Colorado. And the reason we chose this one is because they were very open with parents. And so we thought, well, we will just move out there, and it's COVID. We're working remotely. We'll be there if whatever we need to do. And so, to Ernesto's credit, too, he got in a car and we drove across the country to this place. Took 3 or 4 days, and he willingly went to this treatment facility, which was a voluntary treatment facility, not a lockdown. That was so hard, but people always ask me what I think about residential treatment, and for me, residential treatment helped me.
Sure.
It put our relationship back together. It taught Ernst and I so much, because we as the parents had to do just as much on our side as Ernesto did. He was going through each phase of the program, and we also were.
Wow.
And we had to graduate too. But sadly, Ernesto, again, kind of his adventurous soul, his just willingness to push back. He left the facility twice, unauthorized, walked into Estes Park, Colorado. And so the facility had a very stringent rule that if you leave twice, you're out. So yeah, I'll never forget. It was on a Monday, Thursday in 2021. We get the call that Ernesto had left twice, and we had to pack up Daniel. We had to go to the facility. We had to pick him up. And when we picked Ernesto up, it was Easter Sunday. And yeah, it was this beautiful reunion for the three of us, Ernst, Ernesto, and I. But it was also a hard time. We had to figure out what to do next, because the treatment facility said he can't stay here, but he needs more treatment. So we ended up taking him to Wilderness. He stayed there for a few more months, and then he came home in June 2021 after about 5.5 months of treatment. And he was better. He was better, but it was really hard when he came home. Our relationship had been repaired, but Ernesto said, I just want to be a normal kid. Yeah. It just kind of breaks your heart.
Yeah.
And what he meant by want to be a normal kid, I think he just wanted to have a normal social life. He wanted to be at school. So he asked, and we allowed him to go back to the big public school that he had come from. So this is now in 2021, but this story is a lot of ups and downs if you're kind of hearing this. And so things are better, but he goes back to school. And that was really hard with, all the kids. He had missed a grade. There were some things that made it better, but just super hard. And so things kind of, again, fell apart and drugs, alcohol became a really significant problem at this point. He was skipping class. So finally, in the spring of 2022, we just said, Ernesto, your behavior is telling us that you do not want to be at school. So we are taking this decision away from you, pulling you out of school. And then it was a little bit of an upturn after the spring of 2022. He had a very good relationship with his therapist, who is a wonderful man. He had a wonderful psychiatrist who was really listening to him. We found a medication that was working better, still had bad side effects. So by the fall of 2022, he wasn't taking any medication. We were just trying to find the right thing. And we found a new school, which is a one-on-one school called Fusion Academy, which is mostly in urban areas, but is an amazing resource, not just for people with mental illness, but people who need individual education for any reason. He got a job, he had a girlfriend. So this is where we are in the summer of 2022. And I am starting to breathe a sigh of relief. Like, okay, we're maybe on a plateau at least. And we took a family vacation in August of 2022 to Myrtle Beach, which was really fun. But the suicidal ideation was always there. I think in a way that I understand now, but I didn't. And so I just on September 24th of 2022, Ernesto went to work. It was his first day of work at Pev's Paintball Park, which was a great place for him to work. He came home that day from work on a Saturday, and he was in his room because he was exhausted, and all four of us were in that room together. Yeah, and we were laughing. He was telling us hilarious stories of his day at work. I was rubbing his feet because he was super tired from literally standing for 8 hours. I think it was such a good moment that Ernst said, "Why don't we all go to the movie? Let's capture this moment." And Ernesto said, "No, I told my girlfriend that I'm going to come over and visit with her some tonight." And so we said, okay. So he went to her house, had dinner there with her. And then he said to me before he left, "Mom, can you wash my headband for tomorrow morning?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "And pick me up at 11 or 11:30, but whatever he said, it was earlier than he usually wanted to stay out till the very latest he could stay. But he said, I need to get up early tomorrow for work because he had a second day and of training that day. So I said, okay. I went back to pick him up that night. He did not come out. He did not come out. He was really late. I was very frustrated by the time he got in the car. And when he got in the car, he was just beside himself. He was angry. He was escalating. It was just combative in a way. And so he was escalating. I was de-escalating. I was trying to figure out what is going on. Halfway home, he said, "Leah and I had an issue." And I thought, oh, okay, I understand now, and I tried to ask him questions, but he just immediately went back to where he was. We got home, he got out of the car, he slammed the door, and I just sat there and I prayed. And, I thought, okay, what do I do? Because I think when you're parenting a teen who is struggling, there is a lot of that. You have to stop and you have to think and you have to pray and then go on. And so I got out of the car and I thought, I have to go talk to him. So I walked upstairs, but by the time I got upstairs, he was already back on the phone with his girlfriend, and my child sounded like the voice of reason. He said, "Let's talk about this tomorrow. I'm tired tonight," And she said, "You're confused about us." "No, I'm not confused about you, Leah. I'm confused about life." And so they continued talking, said, "I love you." I thought, okay, well, I'm not interrupting this. I'll go. And I went to the basement because unfortunately, our bedroom, which was right across from Ernesto's, we were having work done. So Ernst was in the basement. So I went to the basement and I woke Ernst up. It is like after midnight now. And I told him the whole thing, what happened, and we talked about it. And he said, "You should go back up." And so I thought, okay, but I was so tired. I was so tired.
Sure.
And so I said, well, I'm going to write him a text because sometimes he responds to that better. And I wrote him 3 things that night. I said, "I'm so sorry the ride home went badly. Thank you so much for sharing your feelings with me." And then I wrote, "I will love you forever, no matter what," which is what we always used to say to one another. "I'll love you forever, no matter what." And then I fell asleep, waiting for a response. The next morning, we were up early. It was 6:30, and Daniel had a swim meet that morning. So Ernst and I were in the kitchen helping him to get ready. He was looking for his slides. And so I said, "Just go to Ernesto's room and see if they're in there." And he did. And when he opened the door, he found his brother hanging in his room. And yeah, I think the only word that I can use to describe that morning was horror. Just horror. There's no other way to describe Ernst's cries, my screams, just not knowing what to do, and just to realize that somehow in those 12 hours, my child lost sight of the dawn. He asked me to get his headband ready for the next morning, but then he just in that moment of darkness, he couldn't see the dawn anymore. Yeah, and I think it's very hard for me, and I think we who don't suffer from mental illness can't know. I just couldn't understand how I could be such a person of hope and my child be in such despair. But I think 2 other things from that morning that I'd like to share. One, in a very miraculous way, that entire day we were not alone. From literally for 12 hours, it was one person after another, whether it was the EMTs, the police, the detectives, the chaplain, my brother's pastor friend, my friend from work, our cleaning team came. I mean, just people walking us through to survive that day. And then there was very little time that we were alone, but there was one moment, and we all sat at the kitchen table in complete shock. And Ernst and I could not speak at all. And Daniel said to the 2 of us, and how he ever could say this, how he knew it, how he could say it, I don't know. But this 13-year-old child said, "Guys, we have to make a pact. We have to stick together. We cannot blame ourselves. This was the wretched disease." And Ernst and I just said nothing, but somehow Daniel had the ability and the wisdom to kind of see above the immediate horror, which was all I could see. And then I guess the other thing I would share is that even in that day, in that very moment, God was there and with me. And somehow I knew it. Like for weeks in advance, I had literally been praying Colossians 3:3 almost as a mantra. And I would say, asking God, "Lord, keep me hidden with you in Christ." That was what I was asking. And so that morning, there wasn't a moment when I was in the kitchen and that verse came to me, and I thought, oh, I have to look that up. So I looked it up, and the actual verse says, for you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. And so I thought, okay, Ernesto is now really hidden with Christ in God, which was not at all how I had heard that verse before. But the other piece that morning that I asked God, I just prayed, please take him. Please take him. And of course, that was a silly thing to pray because he was already gone. But I think there was a part of me that just wanted to know that he was with God. And I heard that morning almost as clear as day, I've got him. So clearly, I heard it that I stopped in my tracks. I looked forward and I imagined in my mind Jesus standing there with his arm around Ernesto. And in the background, there was big Ernesto, who was his grandfather, who he was named after, who was already in heaven. And then just a whirlwind after that.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I'm so sorry that you had to go through all of those things. What a hard, arduous journey that you guys walked through with Ernesto. But I'm so thankful you have the assurance that he's with Jesus and that you'll see him again.
Yes.
I know that doesn't make today any easier. We still, you miss him every moment. And I know Daniel and Ernst miss him as well. But I am thankful for that hope of eternity. You mentioned a whirlwind just a second ago. When I met you previously, you shared with me that you had asked God for a sign at Ernesto's burial. Talk about that.
Yes, Ernesto's burial was over 2 weeks after his death because we chose to have him buried at the Uribe family property, which is in South Texas. So that took a little while for all of us to get down there and to make arrangements. And so he was buried on October 11th, and he died on September 25th. And that morning of the burial, I woke up and I sat out on the porch and I did something that I have never in 45 years as a Christian done or asked for. I asked God for a sign. And I don't even know what kind of sign I wanted. I don't know if I wanted a sign that Ernesto was with God, that God was here with us, that the resurrection is real. And in my mind, I thought, oh, it would just be great if even all I need, even just if a bird lands on the casket, that is fine. I will take that because birds have always been a sign to me of God's provision. So we went up into the ranch property up onto a hill where big Ernesto's grandfather is buried. And we went through the service and there was no sign, nothing, just the service. But at the end of the service, we were using the Episcopal burial service, and they follow really the Easter service, which is interesting. So they use the same liturgy for burial as they do for Easter. So we ended the service with Alleluia, Christ is risen, the Lord is risen indeed. And we all said that. And then Ernst and Daniel and I walked past the casket and we walked down off that hill. And as we walked down off the hill, I think with that knowledge that Christ is risen, suddenly I didn't need a sign. I actually think Ernst and Daniel probably thought I was out of my mind because we got in the truck together to ride back to the ranch property. And I said, guys, I know this is the worst tragedy that we could ever face. And it is horrible and it is bad. But I said, I know that God loves us. I know that He loves Ernesto. I know He created us for a good purpose. And this world is completely broken, but God is going to restore it one day. So I told them that, and they sat in the truck very stoically, not saying anything. And we got back to the ranch, and I think one of the hardest things is then it was like a reception. So informal as it might be, but people were just chit-chatting. And I wanted to I don't know what I wanted, but it wasn't that.
Right. Chit-chatting was not it. Yeah.
No. So then suddenly 2 of the ranch hands came rushing up to Ernst and started speaking to him in Spanish, which I understand a little, but not a lot. And they were very excited and telling him all of these things. And then Ernst came over to me and he said, they said a whirlwind blew over the grave. And I said, what do you mean? He said, it took all the in South Texas, they lay all these beautiful rose petals over the grave. So they had lowered the casket, put the dirt, put the flowers on top, and this whirlwind comes out of nowhere. It was 88, sunny, beautiful, goes over the grave, takes all of the rose petals and blows them around. It was such a violent wind that it broke a leg of the tent that the funeral home had used. It knocked over chairs. It was big. And so I was just floored. I thought, that is a sign. Like, I didn't need it, but that was it. And I wished that Ernesto and Daniel and I had seen it. But then I thought, isn't that kind of like God? Like, the shepherds got the sign, not the kings or the queens. And so I think for me, the whirlwind led me back to Job, where God spoke to Job out of the whirlwind. And and I think the book of Job was very important to me, even though I had that certainty at that moment at the grave. This does not mean that I did not struggle. I did. I had to ask myself if I believed in the resurrection. Do I believe that? Like that? Yeah. Do I believe that? It sounds kind of crazy when you have put someone in the grave to think that this is real. So I did have to struggle with those things, but the whirlwind of Job really helped me, because what God said out of the whirlwind was ultimately, He was asking Job questions. Can you capture a Leviathan? Can you do these things? It was, I'm God, you are not. And, I'm good and I love you. And I realized for the first time in my life that Job never knew the full story.
That's right.
In the beginning of the book, Satan and God have a whole conversation, and God allows this to happen to Job. God never told Job that. Job never knew. And so that was a blessing to me in the year to come, to realize that I might not ever know.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I love that story. I remember when you shared that story at the retreat you attended, and just, we don't always get signs like that from the Lord, but I think He gave that one to you specifically because you needed it in that moment.
I did.
Yeah. Even though you had come to terms with not getting the sign, that you were seeking. And I think that's part of it is you you trusted the Lord without it, and then he gave it to you anyway.
Yes, yes. And it just always reminds me of 2 Corinthians 5:7. We walk by faith, not by sight.
Yes.
I
Right.
think I wanted the sight. I wanted to know. I wanted to see. But
Hmm.
ultimately, coming off that hill, I was walking just in faith. Okay,
That's right.
Christ is
Hmm.
risen. He is risen indeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's beautiful. So, would you mind sharing a little bit about your journey through the mental health care system?
Yes. I think you mentioned the word earlier, but the word that I always use is arduous. It
Hmm.
was
Yeah.
arduous. It was the other word I think I use is complex. It was
Mm.
hard and multifaceted and there were so many layers involved in working through this. We had to learn a whole new language that
Mm.
Ernst and
Sure.
I did not know about levels of care and treatment and medications and insurance filing. What will your insurance cover in terms of mental health? Because sometimes it's not a lot. And if they don't, how do you file for this and
Yeah.
how do you phrase it? And we need this for 30 days. Can we get another 30 days? It was just, yeah. And I think people who have not experienced it or experienced perhaps a child with a serious illness just don't understand quite how time consuming this is. I mean, the emails that I wrote regularly was like a full-time job. I'm writing to
Yeah.
teachers, I'm writing to therapists, I'm writing to the psychiatrist, I'm making sure we were building a fulsome support team around Ernesto to support him through this journey. But I think in hindsight, like you just kind of learn it as you go through, but finding trusted resources and advisors is very helpful. So, the National Alliance for Mental Illness has an extraordinarily comprehensive website that was a very good resource to connect with others. We found an amazing woman who I don't even know what her job was, but we found her at residential. She helped to file the insurance even after Ernesto was out of residential treatment. I would write her and call her and say, "Hey, how should I submit this claim?" So
Mm.
finding people like that you can rely on is super helpful. And then finding parent support. I think Ernst and I probably we got more of that after residential treatment, and we had a transition coach who mostly helped us to kind of take a step back, think about what we were doing, what is the next best step to take, and that was very helpful to us. But I think the other really hard piece about the mental health journey is, besides being arduous and extremely complex, it's often hidden.
Mm. Yeah.
It's not something that our neighbors did not know, what
Wow.
we were facing. And in fact, they saw some of the externals, like when we would call the police because Ernesto was missing, but, never really understanding, So I think that's a hard part when it's hidden like that.
Yeah. I can just imagine how isolating it must be.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it really can be. And, there was it was the summer before Ernesto died. There were 2 things that I think were also God's gift to me that summer, but I somehow recalled what my mother always used to tell me about school: "Do your best. Do your
Mm.
best."
Yeah.
And so that summer, I realized, okay, this is not perfect. We may not have exactly all the right doctors, the medication isn't right. Just, you're tired, you're going, maybe you slept and you shouldn't have, but you just do your best. And I think that
Mhm.
is that is enough. That is enough. And then the other piece that was very helpful to me that summer, and interestingly, I came to this by listening to Johnny and Friends, which is
Mhm.
a ministry for disabled people because Johnny is a quadriplegic since the age of
Mhm.
17, and she has a ministry to support
Mhm.
people with disabilities. But through that ministry, I came to view Ernesto's struggle as a disability. This was
Mm.
not necessarily a disease to be fixed, but it was settling on me that this could just be a disability that he would have to learn to live with. And we
Yeah.
needed to provide supports to him, just like people with physical disabilities need
Sure.
wheelchairs and ramps, and people
Mhm.
with cognitive disabilities need calculators and extra teachers. Ernesto was going to need extra supports for this emotional disability that he was facing. And I wasn't quite sure what that looked like, but those two things kind of transformed how I was thinking about
Mhm.
about the journey. Yeah. Like not
Sure.
something to be fixed, but something to be lived.
More like a chronic condition. Sounds
Yes.
like something that you have to live with and kind of adjust your lives around and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think what you've just shared about your journey through the mental health system and the things that helped you and the things that were difficult are going to help some people that are listening today, if nothing else, than to help them realize that they're not alone in the journey that they walk through.
Yeah. I think there is some freedom once you come
Sure.
to that moment. I remember distinctly that summer of 2022 where I had to leave work early to go pick Ernesto up from school,
Mhm.
and I was rushing out of work. I had rushed into work at 10:30. I'm rushing out at 2:30, and one of my colleagues said, "Oh, you're leaving so soon." And I said as quick as could be, "Yes, I have a special needs teen at home." And I was on my way. So there was, a little I was beginning to make this less hidden, you know, and
Yes.
which was
Mhm.
helpful to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I would think the isolation would be one of the most difficult parts of the journey.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I love what you said about doing your best, realizing that you have to come to the place where I did my best. I'm doing my best. I did my best because that's all we can do.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Thank you for that. As we wrap up this first half of my conversation with Kelly Uribe, we've heard about Ernesto's remarkable life, his battle with depression, and the long and arduous journey their family traveled through the mental health care system. In the second half of our interview, Kelly will share about the unique challenges of losing a child to suicide, the waypoints that have marked her grief journey, and how her faith in Jesus continues to sustain her. I look forward to sharing the rest of our chat with you next Wednesday.